It can seem that narcissistic people are like cats. And not only do they always land on their feet, they manage to make sure that the rest of us tumble into a faceplant and need a minute to deprogram from the nightmare we just emerged from. So let's talk about broken hearts here. Recently I talked about broken hearts, the broken heart of the narcissist on this channel, and the punchline was, a narcissist's broken heart is often a bruised ego. But the question to you is, what about you? Has your heart ever been broken by a narcissistic person? If you're watching this channel, I'm going with the odds are yes. Now, we usually reserve the term broken heart for a romantic relationship. So let's just stay focused there. It can be in other areas, but let's just stay focused there. The broken heart that's caused by an intimate, romantic, committed, call it what you will, relationship with a narcissistic person. So first of all, when we're going through a broken heart, we will hold on to anything to get some help. And you may have turned to the traditional stuff about broken hearts. And there are some really good books out there. There's actually quite a bit of neuroscience about there, and that whole dopamine thing, and even how the immune system is affected and cardiovascular effects. This idea that your heart is actually broken. But even that doesn't begin to scrape the surface of a narcissistic broken heart. But it helps to think about this if you have already had both kinds of broken hearts. So let's say you've had a broken heart in a relationship with a narcissistic person, and you've also had your heart broken in a relationship or by a relationship with someone who's not narcissistic. If you've had both of these heartbreak relationships, you know the difference. It can be tempting to label anyone who breaks your heart as narcissistic, but we all know that that's not necessarily true. People can hurt us and not be narcissistic. And sometimes we are the reason that a relationship falls apart, even if we cause the breakup through our behavior. The fact is, we can still experience a broken heart. And while in the macro, in the larger scale, a broken heart is a broken heart, I do think it varies depending on what led to the broken heart. A broken heart, because someone cheated on you, for example, will feel different than a broken heart that you experience because you grow apart, or you break up because of life circumstances, you can't live near each other. So this video actually came from, and it was stimulated by an article I recently read in the LA Times, where the writer of the article was talking about his own broken heart and trying to heal it. I was trying to figure out what happened, and I just have no idea why his heart broke, and I guess it's his story to tell. He chose not to tell that part of it. He only shared that his broken-hearted story happened suddenly, and that their relationship ended suddenly, and it happened after they'd only been living together for a month. So I didn't fully understand sort of the story around his broken heart, but his heart was broken, right? And as part of his process of healing, he talked to all kinds of academic scholars in anthropology and neuroscience, and he learned a lot of the sort of scientific fundamentals of a broken heart from a science and physiological lens, stuff that we've known for a while. He interviewed people who called it suffering. He looked at Guy Winch's work, who calls it disenfranchised grief. People who've been through narcissistic abuse, by the way, know more about disenfranchised grief, the grief that's not recognized, than anybody out there, by the way. Then there's shame and isolation that comes with a broken heart. He interviews Florence Williams, who says that recovering from heartbreak has to happen. We can't just sit in that heartbroken state forever, because the longer it stretches out, we get vulnerable to getting sick. That a broken heart is a stressor, and that rumination and all the stuff that goes with it creates all kinds of vulnerabilities. The article also does a nice job of getting into the biology of even simple things, that just looking at old pictures can get the old dopamine flowing and create that kind of ecstatic dopamine-y feeling. And when they're taken away, that person is taken away, we crave them. And that, of course, sounds like the trauma bond. The article also cited UCLA's Dr. Naomi Eisenberger's wonderful research on how rejection and physical pain share pretty similar real estate in the brain. And since a narcissistic relationship is basically a daily exercise in rejection, bam, it hurts not only your feelings, but your brain is reacting as though you've been physically hurt. And overall, this tells us that physiologically, these relationships take a toll on us. This isn't just about being anxious and confused and blaming ourselves. This is about physically getting sick. The article then gives some tips on healing, and I read them curiously to see how they may line up with the healing process or healing from a broken heart caused by a narcissistic relationship. So the writer of the article says that he was given 5 suggestions, 5 things to do to heal. And I sat with these 5 suggestions because I wanted to think about how they may play a role in also healing from narcissistic relationships and sort of see, could they work? So the first suggestion he got was, throw out all the old pictures and other memories. I liked this one a lot. You know, I always want people to do that after a narcissistic relationship. And on top of that, if there's only one thing I would encourage survivors to do, is to block the narcissistic person on social media. And maybe even a lot of the people in your world who follows them, because you don't see their stuff, right? And this is easier said than done, but it's sort of a weaning off. And seeing the narcissistic person's Teflon ability to just move on can slow your healing. However, don't be hard on yourself if you can't do it. Some survivors beat themselves up saying, it's my fault. I keep looking at their social media. It happens. Everyone does it. It's really hard to go cold turkey. Sometimes it can help to enlist a friend to help you do the blocking, do it over time, take your time with it, but do it slowly. The second, calm your nervous system. I talk about that a lot. Even in my new book, I talk about that. And break out of that sympathetic nervous system activation. This is good for survivors of narcissistic broken hearts. Again, I write about this a fair amount in my book about healing from narcissistic relationships. These relationships have us on high alert all the time. And all of that hypervigilance is terrible, and it causes a lot of wear and tear on us and our bodies. Figure out what works for you to calm yourself. Meditation, breathing, mindfulness, exercise, a nap, a shower, playing Candy Crush on your phone, simple grounding exercises, reading inspirational books. Something that helps you center and pulls you away from that acute sense of rejection and abandonment and panic. The third idea, which is Narcissism Healing 101, is social support and connection with others. Again, that which heals a broken heart also appears to heal the wounds of narcissistic abuse. But creating social support is tougher for survivors than it is for other folks. Some of you in narcissistic relationships were isolated by the narcissistic person, which means you are starting from behind square one. Some of you don't trust yourself socially. Others of you don't feel worthy. However, you can do this, and it doesn't need to be that you're adding 50 people to your life. Even just a few folks that see you, that offer empathy and kindness, and take yours in and give some back, is a lifesaver and can rewrite the book on what a human relationship can be about. This may also entail seeking out therapy. You may join a support group, but yes, social support, great for all kinds of broken hearts. The next thing they bring up is a sense of meaning and purpose, that thing you get out of bed for every day. This matters a lot in healing from narcissistic abuse. And this gets lost in narcissistic abuse because for so long, a lot of a survivor's life has been appeasing, making sense of, pleasing, winning over, and recovering from the behavior of the narcissistic person. It basically becomes a full-time gig. And what gets lost are the other things that matter in life. Healing means finding you or discovering you, yourself, for the first time, and what grabs you, interests you, matters to you. And this doesn't necessarily just mean your job. It may be your garden, your dog, paintings that you make in your garage, poems you write. It may be your job. It may be a volunteer gig. It may be doing a crossword in ink every day. It may be reading your way through all of a particular author's books or listening to all of a musician's albums. Figure it out, but have something that makes you want to face the day even when it feels unfaceable. And for survivors of narcissistic abuse, that means thinking this way, meaning and purpose for the first time in a long time. One of the suggestions I thought was really great, which is the sense of awe, that sense of something bigger outside of you. The author of this article in the LA Times cites Dr. Keltner's work from UC Berkeley. and who writes about the idea that awe is the thing that inspires you and reminds you of the bigger world that's around you. It can be art in a museum, a night sky, a symphony you listen to, a butterfly on a flower, a passage from a favorite book, a film, something that makes you literally say, ah, wow. I think ah kind of rhymes with awe, right? Narcissistic relationships leave us looking down all the time, or just as far as the narcissistic person's face in our eternal quest to please them. But tuning into that bigger thing outside of you. It could be spiritual, it could be aesthetic. I thought about this. What gives me awe? And my awe comes from the phases of the moon, the magenta color of a hummingbird's throat, the novel I am reading, and that someone can make words do what this lady does with them. This pink sunset I saw the other day that made the sky look like fire. Those things, small things, inspire awe. Survivors need to learn to see the horizon beyond the gaslighting. And even if you don't leave the relationship, this idea of awe is there for you to heal any kind of broken heart, including one from a narcissistic relationship. I'm going to put the link to the article that I read that inspired me here in the video notes, but if you don't, you may not be able to open it if you don't have a subscription to the LA Times, but listen, I feel for the guy who wrote this. I hope he lands on his feet. I thank him for the inspiration I got here. And I was grateful to have to reflect on the ultra broken heart that is the broken heart of a narcissistic relationship. But the healing part, it's similar, but it's harder. Whereas anyone with a broken heart is struggling, the wounds and the confusion of narcissistic abuse may mean that a survivor is a few steps back in terms of having to dig deeper and find that meaning and purpose, to lift their heads to that sense of awe. The trauma bonds make that social media scanning seem almost reflexive. But even though broken hearts and narcissistic relationships can set us back, there is hope. And for once, that hope is not about the narcissistic person changing, but rather about you excavating yourself from this psychological mess of confusion and recognizing that one day you will feel more clear and notice those sunsets and connect with new folks and not be on edge and realize that you didn't feel the need for 24 hours to check their social media once. Broken hearts do heal, but in the process of healing can take a minute. And for those of you who are healing from broken hearts from a narcissistic relationship, that minute can be a lot longer. It can seem that narcissistic people are like cats. And not only do they always land on their feet, they manage to make sure that the rest of us tumble into a faceplant and need a minute to deprogram from the nightmare we just emerged from. And that was not a diss on cats. You know I love cats. Sorry, cats. But the narcissistic person in the relationship with you, they didn't feel deeply. And they don't feel deeply. So it's really easy for narcissistic people to quickly jump into the next thing. Keep in mind, too, that for narcissistic folks, that when they enter a new relationship, it's a formula. It's love bomb, devalue, discard, hoover every time. For healthy folks, when we enter new relationships, each time may feel a little different because we meet the other person where they are at. We account for context. The narcissistic person approaches a new relationship with a bag of tricks. The same bag of tricks. The same bag of tricks every time. They have the same lines, the same text messages, the same wine and dine, the same little tactics they use each time. It's like going to a chain restaurant. No matter where you go, the menu is the same, the decor is the same, the uniforms are the same. They do only one thing. And it's the same for the narcissistic folks. Their love bomb tactics play out similarly with each new person they meet. And they need supply. The narcissistic person is forever hunting, like a bear set to go into hibernation. They need new admiration, a lot of it, new people. So when they find a new person, boom, they are in it. Let's focus on you first. Once upon a time, what I'm talking about wasn't nearly as robust a conversation. I grew up pre-social media and I grew up pre-internet. So when I was young and dating, these things didn't exist. So unless you were like CSI, you weren't going to be able to figure out what your ex was up to unless you lived in a really small town or they started dating within the same circles that you were in. Again, you would have had to become a stalker and follow them home from work or something to figure out where they are and who they were with and what they were doing. And actually, all of that, I think, once upon a time was better for survivors of these relationships. Because unless you had a lot of time on your hands and were more than a little obsessive, you wouldn't have had the time, resource, or fear of getting caught that all would come together. And basically what would happen is instead of becoming a stalker or trying to figure it out, you'd cry it out and let it go. In the modern age, the narcissistic move on has become a horrifying experience. And if you are at all clever on social media, you can quite easily be a detective. You can sit down and figure out who they're talking with, who they're following, where their pictures were taken, where they are. And then once they really go all in on moving forward with someone, they have no shame. They pose their little loved up pictures, and in some cases it'll make you nauseous. Because it's like someone is now living in your love-bombed life from the past. It literally feels like Black Mirror. And you have basically, when you start living in that world of looking at the narcissist who's moved on, you've put the brakes on your healing. Because each moment you spend looking at the narcissistic person's new life and researching who the replacement is, you are actually continuing to give them bandwidth and giving it all to them and not yourself. Listen, bandwidth is finite, and so if you're giving 90% of it to them, there's almost none left out. And when you do that, you miss out on the absolutely precious time that you need towards your own healing. All the stuff that I say on this channel repeatedly, that narcissistic folks have no capacity for deep intimacy, they're superficial, it works, any relationship works as long as it works for them, and it feels like a novelty. But when real life happens, the cracks will show in their personality, and the other person will go through what you did. And the narcissistic person will remain entitled, unempathic, gaslighty, manipulative, dismissive. None of that changes. And then you'll stop watching this channel and switch over to folks who may teach you how to get back at them or how to get revenge. This part of grief and healing is awful because there's no pushing a fast forward button on it. While they are love bombing someone else, you go back to remembering how that felt for you. You know how seductive it was. You know how they were able to make you feel like the center of their universe, and you fell for it. So of course someone else is going to fall for it. And they'll have that feeling that once upon a time you did, when you believed, when you really believed, and you know with a feeling, a pit of dread in your stomach, that there is no feeling like it in the world. Even though you now know it was all BS, while it was happening, and before you knew, that there was no feeling like it in the world. And it feels like they are winning because they aren't even thinking about you. They have their new supply. They don't think there is a single thing that they did wrong. They may even be congratulating themselves and thinking how they did so great and moving forward into their new love story and how they deserve all the happiness in the world. How do you cope when the narcissist moves on, especially when they move on really fast? It may not even be what we would call coping at this phase. I think it might make more sense to call it suffering. It will be all of the many phases and aspects of grief. Anger and denial, and more anger and tears and confusion and anxiety and self-blame and more self-blame. And maybe if I just went along with everything, they would still be with me and someone else wouldn't be love-bombed. And then you get lost in the injustice of it all. And then there's more anger. Pick a negative emotion and you will feel it. And I do hope that you lift your head long enough to write down all the awful things that happened in the relationship. or have a friend or two that can help you with that. Since during this phase, when the narcissistic person first moves on, you don't remember it, since you're caught in an endless loop of rumination and euphoric recall. When it comes to coping in these circumstances, time is your friend, because yes, every time with more time it gets easier. But it can feel like a lifetime. Having a routine helps too, something to get you going out of bed, work, caregiving, walking a dog, something. Then there's other people, and talking it out, and therapy can be very helpful here too. Paying attention to the things in life that are now easier with them gone can also be useful. But that's hard at this stage. It takes more discipline than just about anything, but if you can do this, click out of social media for a while, cancel it if you have to. But seeing their new life is just going to take you back to zero every single day. And be gentle with yourself. Sweatpants, ice cream for breakfast, sleeping in, maybe a few days off, missing out and skipping out of your friends' get-together, it's okay. I actually don't think we treat broken hearts with the gravitas and the seriousness they deserve. If someone's sick, we say, oh, definitely stay home. Hell, if someone has an episode of depression, sometimes people will cut slack. But we tend to minimize broken hearts, and that's not right. A broken heart is an acute pain, and people need a minute. And a broken heart from a narcissistic relationship is exponentially worse. It will get better. Yes, you will ruminate for a long time, but someday you'll hear that the cracks are showing in their new situation, if it even lasts. And honestly, by the time those cracks start showing, you may be past it. The day will come, and it will come, and you'll get to the end of that day, and you'll realize you didn't think about them once. But it's a bumpy and treacherous and rumination and regret-soaked road to get there. And as you get some distance from it, you will recognize that in a weird way, as you watch the new person be love-bombed, it was like watching a new recruit get pulled into a cult. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to stop someone in the early months of a cult entry process, but good luck with that. You may even want to keep them from that culty place. And you know that scene you've seen in a movie when the person tells the person not to join the evil group, and the person joining the evil group tells the person who's trying to stop them that they're crazy? That's kind of how they're going to approach it. I know you might even want to warn this person, new person going into the relationship with the narcissist. It might even feel morally right, a duty to warn them, but they aren't going to listen. Cults and narcissists are both very alluring in the beginning, and everyone thinks it will be different for them. I can promise you this, it won't. And while early on you just wanted to blow it up, you recognize that the disgusting part of this whole narcissism thing is that the narcissistic people, like all cult leaders, have a bottomless pit of people to draw from. People out there who don't get it, who don't understand it, who don't want to get it, who don't want to understand it, and who will be ultimately wrecked by it too. The narcissistic tactics work really well. It's not your job to rescue the new person. Let them fall into the pit and get themselves out. We all learn to ride our bikes by falling a few times. It's very similar. I have tried to stop people before they get in. But I get some speech about how I'm mean and dark and don't understand true love. Those things may be true, but in this case, I was trying to help them. I always know that these folks will come back around with time and that they had to learn on their own by experience. Listen, you can get more data about the new coffee shop down the street on Yelp, or which refrigerator is best, or the best plumber in town by looking at ratings. We don't have this sort of publicly sourced rating system for people. I don't know that I buy the party line that these ratings wouldn't be valid because everyone will have such a different experience. Imagine if we could read the reviews about narcissistic people. Maybe they'd say things like, The first 3 months were magical, and then they disappeared. It made me feel crazy when I wanted more intimacy. With narcissism, everyone doesn't have a different experience. Everyone will ultimately get burned. Before crowdsourced ratings, we ate at the crappy restaurant and got sick and could only tell our friends because there was no rating place. Or we got scammed by that bad plumber, or we bought a fridge and wasted money. Sadly, with narcissistic folks, the new supply will just need to get hurt. Experience is a harsh but effective teacher. And let's face it, and maybe all of you are better people than me, but there is a little bit of schadenfreude there too, and that's okay. They can keep posting their "I found my true love because I made my intention known to the universe" Instagram posts, high horses. Ultimately, they're going to get back into the mud with the rest of us. It takes time to heal. It takes time, especially when the narcissistic person's able to move on so quickly. It will get better, just maybe not today. Hang in there. I know you won. You don't see checkmate yet, but it's coming. Now, grief in narcissistic relationships is such a complicated space, right? We grieve when we lose something. And I'm always going to come back to this really great quote that David Kessler shared with me, who was a world-renowned grief expert. He said, "We grieve those we love, we grieve those we like, and we grieve those we hate." Loss is loss. And human beings, among other species, we go through an experience when we go through loss. But we often reserve that term grief to only talk about death. And grief can be about any kind of loss. People who go through divorce, they have grief. People whose house burns down go through grief. And people who lose a job go through grief. So loss leads to grief. And the challenging part of grief in a narcissistic relationship is you're losing stuff all the time. You're losing yourself. You're losing hope. You're losing this sort of hope for a future that you thought would look a certain way, or you look back on a life and hope that you'd had a childhood that you wanted or a safe family to return to. So the losses mount up. There can be the daily losses, the daily reminders of how unhealthy the relationship is. And it gets confusing when those good days get peppered in there, and then you still feel that sense of grief. So the loss is a constant, but then there's a whole another game when the actual relationship ends. And what throws a lot of people off, and one thing that wasn't very clear about this woman's question was whether she wanted the marriage to end or not, in the sense of, did she want to be out of this relationship? Because even when people want the relationship to be over, they're like, I am so glad I'm out of this relationship, that there is still a sense of grief that it's done. Because even though you may be glad that the person is out of your life, all the things that, in this case she was married, the things that it symbolized, being a part of something, having a family, having a life partner, even those sort of intellectual losses are gone. This thing that was in your life is no longer in your life, and your identity shifts. You lose an identity as a married person, whatever it may be. So those losses are there as well. But even if you want it, I think those are the folks who are actually the most sort of thrown off by the level of grief that can sometimes happen. There may be a honeymoon period initially, but again, we know when so many narcissistic relationships ends, there is post-separation abuse too, and there's very messy divorces, so that can also take the grief and complicate it quite a bit. But people will sometimes wonder, like, why am I grieving this? I wanted it done. Now, if the narcissistic person ends the relationship, ends the marriage, as this person was married, that can be utter devastation, because a person can say, I literally tried to do everything a human being could do. I did everything. I gave up all of myself, and this thing is still, I couldn't get it right. And I don't know that you weren't getting it right. I don't know that right is a thing. And may then literally very quickly you'll find yourself replaced by someone else. So there's all kinds of griefs there, as well as core wounds being activated. So that's all the grief stuff. But what this woman's question was about was the grief versus rumination piece. What's the difference? Now, rumination is a absolutely classical and core element of the fallout of narcissistic abuse. When a person's gone through a narcissistically harmful relationship, they will ruminate. They'll ruminate while they're in it, and they'll ruminate when they get out of it. Rumination, just not to be too booky about it, but rumination isn't always a bad thing. If it gets you to a solution, it's actually a good thing. Any of you who might puzzle over something, I'm a big person who does this in the shower. You puzzle over something, you puzzle over something, you puzzle over something. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I could do it this way. That's when rumination's doing what it could do, right? It's getting you to a solution as you kind of keep churning the wheels, right? Rumination in a narcissistic relationship is a bit of a disaster because it doesn't get you to a solution. Many times like, well, what if I said it this way? And why did they say that to me? And did I read that? There's a lot of trying to make sense of something that really doesn't make sense. And to make sense of it, you have to swallow an absolute truth that's really uncomfortable, which is this pattern's not going to change and you're in an unhealthy relationship. So to avoid that, the rumination is the going around. And what happens is if you ruminate and ruminate and ruminate and ruminate and never come to a solution, that's a precursor to feeling depressed and helpless and hopeless, which are also further precursors to feeling more depressed. So in this particular case, it sounds like this person is thinking a lot about the relationship and what has been lost. Rumination is a classical part of grief. It is, people will say when they're in the acute stages of grief, they can't stop thinking about it. They, and the minute they start getting pulled more into normal life, they almost feel like they get snapped back into the grief state. Now, in the early stages of grief, rumination is not only normal, it may be sort of the process sort of unfolding. There's no magical line where we can draw and say this grief has gone on too long. Right? It's a really tricky thing. In the DSM, the diagnostic manual, they actually tried to say if it goes like a year, then it's maybe too long. There's a lot of grief experts out there who will say, you know what, let's not put a number on this one. When it comes to narcissistic relationship, I have seen people carry this rumination out, maybe even some of the grief out, for years. The more toxic, the more, often the longer it lasted, and the more confusing the relationship was, especially if the good moments were very good, like they felt good, you really felt like you were part of something, and then the gaslighted, manipulative, icky, critical, awful moments were there. That gap makes it harder. I think if it was like, sometimes trauma bonding can be created in a relationship where it's like you're going between abuse and really bad abuse, right? That's different. But when those good moments felt good, like you felt you were part of something, you enjoyed your lifestyle, your home, the people you knew mutually, family vacations, people will say giving up that stuff, feeling like a part of something, is what really, really fosters the grief, but also fosters the rumination. I do have to say that many times the rumination can be worse when a person is left by a narcissistic person, as though that sense of getting, of somebody, no matter what you tried and how many times you tried to right the ship and get it right, that you got left and you weren't ready for this thing to end. That definitely will foster the rumination more. Where did this go wrong? And because more often than not, when a narcissistic person leaves you suddenly, it's because they found someone else, is that now you're ruminating of how long is that going on? The narcissistic person will, of course, insist that they met the person conveniently the day after you broke up. You know that's not true. So that all the confusion around that, I do think the rumination is worse when the narcissistic person leaves the marriage versus when a person does leave the narcissistic relationship. There's a lot more thinking, planning, thinking ahead that you wanted to be out of this. But either way, the rumination is that getting stuck in the thought loops. It's no longer about loss. The grief part, giving the short answer to this question I've made very long, yapping. The grief part is the part that's about loss, right? The rumination is the still trying to work the problem. If that makes sense. Now, is there overlap? Absolutely. But that sense of I lost my home, I sort of feel like I might have lost my place in the world, I lost my identity as a married person. That's grief. I can't believe, like, how, can you explain to me why they kept doing that? That, like, trying to still figure it out, that's rumination. That's really the difference. The figuring it out versus the losses. The two overlap quite a bit. And I would say that when you're really stuck in that rumination, even in that post-narcissistic phase, support groups, education, therapy all become very useful, especially with a therapist who gets this. Because sometimes, and I've said this to every client I've ever worked with, they'll say, Dr. Ramani, I feel ridiculous that I'm taking your time and wasting my money on telling the same story over and over again. But they're not telling the same story over and over again. The story changes with each telling, and a little piece of it is put down each time. But it is hard to turn to friends and think that they'd be able to hear the rumination all the time. People around you, I mean, it's a fact, they do burn out. Because they may think that they're hearing the same thing over and over again. They're like, they were a bad guy. You should be glad they're gone. It ain't that simple. You need places where people can say, or a person can say to you, it's not that simple. One day you will put it down, and some of this rumination can last a long, long time, sometimes a lifetime. But that's the difference between the two. And those of you who have been in a relationship that ended with a narcissistic person, you've experienced grief, you've experienced rumination, but the piece that often sticks around is the rumination. So how do you move forward after a narcissistic relationship in your life has ended? How do you start dating again? How do you meet new people? How do you trust them again? This is a question I get repeatedly. Am I ever going to be able to get into a relationship again? I'm afraid. The question then becomes, what are you afraid of? And most people will say, getting hurt again. Listen, nobody wants to get hurt. For example, when it comes to physical pain, we are reflexively wired to avoid situations or anything that we anticipate is going to cause pain. And psychological pain registers in the brain the same way and may even feel worse. The mind F is that the narcissistic relationship, or I should say the mind F in the narcissistic relationship, is that you look back and you often think, I got played. I believed in the love bombing. I believed the things that they told me. I thought it was real. All of the rest of this bad stuff, it snuck up on me. I didn't know about this narcissism stuff. But the entire relationship can feel like a grift, a scam, a con. And that not only leaves us feeling foolish, but our feelings were also real and may still be real. And so we feel deeply hurt. And the sense of foolishness and being taken advantage of makes the pain really, we feel ridiculous for being hurt. But as you go forward, like many people who come out of these relationships and learn about what they are, the instinct is to hold back and to feel as though you can trust no one. You may put a tentative toe into the dating world and either notice real red flags or notice stuff that may not be red flags, but it makes you nervous. You don't want to miss the signs again. You don't want to feel played again. You don't want to get hurt again. So you're very, very vigilant. And then you may start to feel sort of stuck. So listen, anyone who's watched my work, you know my rule. General rule is 1 year off after a narcissistic relationship ends. 1 year off of new relationships or dating. There's just too much healing that has to happen. And having to navigate a new person before prior trauma bonds are sort of adequately healed and addressed, it's sort of a recipe for falling back into a new problem. But after that year, and for lots of folks it's longer than a year, and support and getting all the stuff, some of the stuff one would hope that you need to slowly move forward, the fear is often comprised of a mix of getting hurt and getting played again. So here's the deal. The getting played again, a lot of that is ego. Nobody wants to look back and say, how didn't I see it? We feel foolish or dumb, but that is ego. The onus, the bad behavior is still on the grifter who played you. They're the ones who did the wrong thing, but it doesn't feel good. And in the interest of not getting played, most folks will say that as they start sort of dating again, that they're quicker on the draw when they see a red flag, sometimes a bit too quick on the draw, if there is such a thing. But the real fear is the getting hurt, right? It's the fear of ever having to navigate through the confusion and the manipulation and wondering if it is you. You don't want to go through that again, and that unnameable hurt in your chest and in your throat when you're being gaslighted or manipulated or lied to, because that is what people are trying to avoid. If you do decide that, yeah, you want to try again, you want to explore having a relationship again after having experienced narcissistic abuse, and then you took that year and you know that you enjoy your own company well enough, and you do have some good supports and people to talk to, take solace in the idea that although the hurt sucks, if you've learned one thing after surviving a narcissistic relationship, you know you can manage it. And frankly, that anyone has more than one child after going through labor once, well, that's a miracle, right? But people do. You forget the pain. You get to the other side. And once you have been through the hurt of a narcissistic relationship, you are really good at this healing from the hurt thing. And when you went through the first bout of healing from a broken heart or from a narcissistic hurt, and you didn't quite yet understand what you were up against, that was the heaviest load of all. Learning what narcissism is, how it shows up, putting the pieces together, healing from the betrayal. You don't need to do the learning part this time. You may feel that ego bruise for a minute, but that heals even faster. And you may also wonder, what if this next person is not narcissistic, but they hurt me anyhow? And you have the sense that, what if all this stuff I learned about narcissism doesn't really help me? That this time it didn't work out because the person just went back to an ex, that they hadn't fully closed that down, or they didn't cheat, but they did meet someone else in the early phases of our dating before we were really a thing, but I was super into them. Or they approach you and they say that they aren't feeling it with you, and they say it respectfully, and they go their separate ways, or that they feel that they've grown apart from you, or that they're moving away physically to another place, or just that they don't want a relationship, or that the two of you want different things. The normal and healthy reasons that people break up. And you may think, oh God, I was able to navigate the narcissistic broken heart, but this is new territory. But it's just this hurt or sad part again. And if you could heal from hurt that was also accompanied by gaslighting and manipulation, you can heal from this too. Broken hearts take time. And frankly, if after a narcissistic relationship, your next heartbreak is a healthy breakup, you definitely learn the difference and may think like, I'm bummed that that didn't work out. I liked that person, but I still feel like a whole person. And that matters. If we stopped everything in our lives and never did it again because we're afraid of hurt or of getting our egos bruised, we would have never finished school. We would never try anything. We wouldn't even, I don't think we'd get out of bed, go to work, nothing. Something about trying again, giving love a chance again or friendship a chance again after a narcissistic relationship, it can feel almost masochistic. And in my experience, most people initially overcorrect and walk away from relationships that may have actually even had some potential because of some of the pinkish flags that show up. Believe me when I tell you, you will survive. We all did. Scraped knees and crushes who didn't know we were alive and failing a final exam and even much bigger stuff. Deaths and illnesses and financial hits. And you will survive the next heartbreak that comes after a narcissistic relationship. And who knows, maybe there won't be another heartbreak. You've got to hold some space for that possibility as well. But when you are a human being, there is no avoiding pain. it's tempting to try to avoid pain. And in fact, anxiety disorders really are people who are systematically trying to avoid anything that frightens them or scares them or could hurt them. And then the net result of that is that you may never leave the house. But you won't know. You won't know until once you feel you're ready, you try. Listen, you're a genius at recovering from hurt. And armed with that, take it slow. Not everyone is narcissistic, and not everyone is untrustworthy. And while you are healing or in the middle of it, it can feel that way, but it's not true. But I know it really feels that way.